There is a number that, according to the metaphysical studies of Connie Mendez in the 1960s, could activate something she called the Law of Divine Accumulation. And no, it wasn't the typical weird ritual that promises millions in 2 days while you're still checking your bank account in emotional agony. They say that this number completely changed the life of a secretary in Caracas who was practically broke and ended up building a fortune that seemed impossible for someone in her situation. But here's the important part. According to Connie, the number only worked if it was used exactly as she taught, without changing anything, without adding your own touch, because we already know how that ends. Before I reveal to you what this number is, which for more than 6 decades has been associated with prosperity and material manifestation, I need you to do something first. Write in the comments, "I am divine abundance manifesting through me." Because by doing so, you're not just writing a nice phrase, you're affirming an identity, you're preparing your mind to enter the frequency that, according to metaphysics, allows you to attract abundance. And what you're going to discover can forever change the way you see money. It all started with a woman named Carmen Rodriguez. She was 43 years old and worked as a secretary in a government office in Caracas in 1968. Her salary was barely enough to survive. She paid the rent, covered the basics, and the money disappeared as if it had supernatural powers. Saving was impossible. One day, Carmen attended a conference by Connie Mendez at the Municipal Theater of Caracas. And that night, she heard something that left her completely shocked. Connie explained that during her studies of metaphysical numerology in New York, she discovered a specific number that, when written exactly 18 times in a row, activated a frequency linked to material manifestation. An idea inspired by teachings attributed to Pythagoras, who claimed that numbers possess vibrations capable of influencing reality. Carmen had already read parts of Connie's metaphysical teachings. She knew that she related numbers to spiritual, mental, and energetic forces. But that night she revealed something that, according to many attendees, she had never explained publicly in such detail. The number was 361. Connie said that words vibrate, thoughts vibrate, and numbers do too. According to her interpretation, 361 represents the complete cycle of manifestation united with divine power. 360 symbolized the complete circle, the totality of creative movement. And 1 represented unity with God, the origin, the creative consciousness, the famous I am, which she constantly repeated in her metaphysical decrees. That's why she claimed that 361 activated a kind of law of spiritual and material accumulation. As she taught in one of her decrees, provision comes from God, and now it flows and accumulates under grace. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. According to Connie, the power of 361 came from the combination of 3 symbolic principles. The 300 represented the amplified Trinity on the material plane. The 60 symbolized the 6 days of creation, multiplied by 10. Expansion, divine work, construction, and the 1 represented absolute unity with the creative source. But there was another key detail. It had to be written exactly 18 times. Why 18? Because in numerology, 1 plus 8 equals 9, and 9 is considered the number of completion, reward, and the closing of cycles. In other words, completing the process to receive the result. And then Carmen decided to try it. She followed each step exactly as Connie had explained that night. Step 1. Upon waking up, before talking to anyone, even before looking at any distractions, she would take a blank sheet of paper and a blue or black ink pen. Step 2. At the top, she would write the date and her full name. Step 3. Below, she would write this decree. I am God's wealth in action. Within me is the power to attract what I need and more. Step 4. Then I would write the number 361, exactly 18 times, arranged in rows of 3 step 5. While I was writing, I visualized money coming from different directions and repeated it mentally. Unexpected doors open. Invisible channels appear. Everything flows freely to me. Step 6. When she finished, she folded the paper into 4 parts, and she kept it in her wallet for 21 days. That's what Carmen did, without skipping anything, without changing the process. And even though no visible miracle happened in the first few days, something started to change inside her. A strange feeling began to appear. More confidence, more trust. As if for the first time in years, she stopped feeling doomed to just survive and started to believe that she could really attract economic opportunities into her life. On the 14th, something happened that Carmen would never forget. That morning seemed just like any other. She woke up early. She made coffee. She looked at the bills piling up on the table and felt the same pressure in her chest that had been with her for years. That silent feeling of just surviving, but never moving forward. And still she kept doing the ritual. No visible results, no magical signs. A rain of money falling from the ceiling. Because clearly that's not how life works. Although sometimes you wish it did. But that afternoon he got an unexpected call. It was a former coworker he had barely spoken to in years. After talking for a few minutes, the woman made him a completely unexpected proposal to become partners and sell homemade desserts from home. Now, for anyone else, it might sound like something small, but for Carmen, it was huge. Because she had never dared to start a business. She had always lived trapped between the fear of failure and the idea that stability was safer. Even though that stability was leaving her emotionally and financially drained. And then something strange happened. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a sense of certainty, not hope, not wishful thinking. Certainty, as if inside her, something had silently changed during those 14 days, writing the number 361 over and over again. She accepted the proposal, and without realizing it, she had just opened the door that would completely change her financial reality. The following days were intense. Carmen started baking at dawn. She worked during the day, and at night she kept preparing orders. She slept very little. She was exhausted, but there was something different about her energy. She was no longer acting out of desperation. She was acting out of conviction. And that, according to Connie Mendez, was exactly the point where all material transformation begins. Because Connie taught that abundance doesn't start with money. It starts in consciousness. It starts when the mind stops repeating, "I can't. It's not enough. I'm not lucky." And it starts holding a completely different self-image. Then day 21 arrived, the last day of the ritual. That morning, Carmen finished writing the number for the 18th time. She carefully folded the paper and put it in her wallet, just as she had done for 3 whole weeks. Hours later, the phone rang. It was one of the clients who had approved her desserts days earlier, but this time, he wasn't calling to place a small order. He was calling to offer her a permanent contract to supply desserts to a chain of restaurants. Carmen was paralyzed, and then came the detail that made her tremble. The contract was for exactly 361,000 believers per month. Exactly the same number that Connie Mendez associated with material accumulation and the manifestation of prosperity. At that moment, Carmen remembered something that Connie often repeated in her lectures. What you accept mentally ends up finding a way to appear in your reality. And that's precisely what makes this story so fascinating. Because beyond the mystery, beyond numerology, Connie understood something deeply powerful about the human mind. She taught that thought sustained with emotion becomes a vibrational force capable of altering decisions, perceptions, and opportunities. And even though many mocked these ideas, the reality is that even today modern neuroscience recognizes something important. The mind filters reality according to what it considers important. In other words, when a person deeply changes what they focus on, they also change the opportunities they are able to perceive. And that was exactly what the 361 ritual aimed to provoke. Not just to attract money, but to transform a mindset of scarcity. Because someone trapped in scarcity thinks differently, speaks differently, makes different decisions, even walks differently. And Connie said that as long as a person keeps vibrating fear, guilt, or a sense of insufficiency, they will unconsciously keep pushing away the opportunities they desire. That's why she emphasized emotion so much. Most of the people who tried the ritual failed for a very simple reason. They did it mechanically. They wrote the number while thinking, I hope this works. I'm sure this is absurd. I don't think anything will happen. And according to Connie, that was the fatal mistake. Because the subconscious doesn't just respond to words, it responds to repeated emotion. That's why she taught you that when you wrote the number, you had to intensely visualize what you wanted to experience. Not as a distant dream, but as something that was already happening. To feel relief, security, abundance, gratitude. Because according to his teachings, emotion is the language that the subconscious uses to accept a new reality. And here comes something even more interesting. Connie claimed that the physical act of writing created a much more powerful connection than simply thinking. Why? Because writing simultaneously involves 3 levels: thought, physical movement, and emotion. The mind imagines, the hand executes, and the body begins to believe. That was what she called the triple manifestation. And the more times the process was repeated, the more deeply the idea was imprinted in consciousness. But there was another reason why the number had to be written exactly 18 times. And this is something that almost no one really understood. According to the metaphysical studies that Connie shared, 18 represented 2 complete cycles of transformation, from 1 to 9 internal learning, from 10 to 18, external manifestation. First you change inside, then the reality around you changes. And that explains why many people give up too quickly. They want immediate external results without realizing that true change starts in the mind long before it is reflected in money. In fact, Connie used to say something that made a lot of people uncomfortable. Poverty first settles in as an idea, and maybe that's why so many people remain trapped in the same patterns.
Durante años, porque aunque desean abundancia, emocionalmente siguen identificándose con la escasez. Pero lo más impactante de todo no fue el caso de Carmen, ni siquiera los cientos
of testimonies that later began to circulate in different countries in Latin America. What was truly unsettling was what Connie claimed about people who used this technique correctly for more than 21 consecutive days. Because according to her, after a certain point, the coincidences started to become too exact to ignore. Because according to Connie Mendez, the real power was never in the number by itself. It was in the emotional energy with which you were able to activate it. She constantly insisted on this because she saw the same mistake repeated over and over again in her lectures. People writing 361 like robots, without emotion, without conviction, without presence, like someone filling out a boring form hoping it will magically change their life. And according to Connie, that would never work. Because when you write the number without feeling absolutely anything, the ritual loses its power and it simply becomes ink on paper. She said that the key was certainty, not hope. Not in wishing, but in the deep feeling that something has already started to move in your favor, even if you can't see it yet. That's why she constantly repeated, it's not enough to just say the words. You have to feel them, because for her, emotion was the real switch that activated the subconscious. And this is where things get even more interesting. Connie claimed that when a person manages to hold an intense emotion while writing the number, it gradually begins to alter their mental state, their decisions, and even the way they perceive opportunities. In other words, abundance first settles in your consciousness, and then it starts to show up outwardly. That's why Carmen started to change even before receiving any money. First, she changed her energy. Then she changed the way she acted, and finally her financial reality changed. But the most surprising thing was that according to some students close to Connie Mendez, there was a much more intense version of this practice. A version that she only shared with advanced students connected to the metaphysical teachings of Saint-Germain. And this is where the so-called advanced level came in. For 40 consecutive days, the person had to write the number 361 in the morning, and another 18 times before going to sleep. But there was an additional detail. Before going to bed, they had to repeat this decree. My money multiplies while I sleep, under grace and in a perfect way. Now think about this for a moment. Right before sleeping is when the subconscious becomes most receptive. The conscious mind lets its guard down. And according to Connie, planting an idea repeatedly in that state accelerated the process of mental manifestation. But that wasn't all. There was still a deeper level, the master level. And honestly, this was the one that intrigued those who followed his teachings the most. Because here, the ritual stopped being confined to paper and started becoming part of everyday life. Every time the person spent money, they had to mentally visualize the number 361 and repeat, this money comes back to me multiplied by 361. Why was this so important? Because, according to Connie, most people spend money out of fear, with anxiety, with a sense of loss, as if every dollar spent is a final goodbye. And that feeling of lack was precisely what, according to her, kept the flow of prosperity blocked. That's why she taught something that seemed simple, but completely changed the relationship with money. Spend with joy because God is your inexhaustible source. The idea was to train the mind to stop associating money with suffering, fear, and scarcity. Because whatever you emotionally feel as a loss, your subconscious will try to avoid it. But whatever you experience as flow and abundance will tend to expand. And this is where thousands of people claim to have started noticing coincidences that were impossible to ignore. Unexpected payments, sudden opportunities, clients appearing out of nowhere, unexpected calls, ideas that ended up generating income, as if something slowly started to reorganize itself around them. Now, Connie Mendez never asked people to believe blindly. In fact, he constantly said something very interesting. Don't accept anything just because I say so. Try it. She insisted that metaphysical teachings should be practiced, not just read as nice phrases to feel spiritual for 5 minutes and then go back to the same old mental pattern. Because in her own words, only what is practiced remains. And maybe that's why the number 361 continued to quietly circulate for decades across different Latin American countries. Without big campaigns, without advertising, without the need for extravagant rituals or mysterious objects sold at absurd prices. As happens today with many things on the internet, just paper, a pen, and the ability to hold on to a new idea about yourself. Because in the end, the true core of Connie's teachings was this. You are not someone doomed to beg for opportunities. You are a conscious creator actively participating in your reality. And that was exactly what Carmen ended up understanding. Over time, that small pastry business grew much more than she ever imagined. She went from selling from home to supplying businesses and eventually building a stable and profitable company. But the most important thing wasn't the money, it was the internal transformation. Because the woman who used to live paralyzed by fear stopped feeling small in the face of life. And she always attributed that change to the moment when she started repeating daily, I am God's wealth in action. Because according to Connie Mendez, the number 361 does not create abundance. Abundance already exists. What the number does is help you mentally align with it, help you break the scarcity programming, help you sustain a new emotional frequency. And here comes something that Connie used to repeat constantly. Most people don't block money because of a lack of ability, but because of the identity they hold internally. Because if someone perceives themselves as lacking, insufficient, or destined to fail, they will unconsciously keep making decisions aligned with that identity. That's why she insisted so much on decrees. Because repeating a new truth daily slowly began to erode old mental beliefs. And maybe that's why the fact that you've listened to this story up to this point is not a coincidence. Maybe something inside you is already tired of thinking from a place of limitation. Maybe a part of you feels ready to leave behind years of financial fear, anxiety, and a sense of scarcity. Because as Connie taught, there are no missed opportunities in the kingdom of God. When one door closes, another one begins to open. Who takes out pen and paper? Write the number 361 as if you were activating a new version of yourself, not from desperation, but from conviction, from the feeling that something can start to change. Because maybe true power was never only in the number, but in the person you become while you write it. Not the EO